Welcome to Our Hometown, the show where we take an in-depth look at some of the people and organizations that make this area unique. This month we're highlighting a few of Brunswick County's local authors. First, we'll speak with Edith Edwards, a local fiction writer, and then we'll speak with Mary Brown, whose introduction to authorship took a different road than most. Finally, we'll show you an interview with Marybeth Whalen that we covered a while back. She doesn't live locally, but is passionate about writing about our area. Stay with us for the next half hour as we explore our hometown. We're continuing in our series of interviewing writers, and our guest today is Dr. Edith Edwards. Dr. Edwards, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Each writer has a unique angle or a different perspective. Tell us how long you've been writing and how you got started. How does one get started in the business of writing?
Words have always come easy to me. I've always enjoyed writing. When we lived in Tennessee, I started a book, and then we moved back to North Carolina in 2004, and I wasn't even sure it was still on my flash drive, and my writers group was very upset that I didn't know it. So the answer would be seriously from 2004 on. I've been writing, and
well, you're an educator,
right?
And you've already told me you're a wordsmith. So those two backgrounds provide a pretty good combination to begin writing.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Several of your books are with us here today. Where does one get the inspiration to become a writer?
It just comes, and I find that if I'm writing somewhere when my husband's driving, just to have a little piece of paper and write, and the characters tell me their stories. I know I think it was this book, I was writing along, and all of a sudden I thought, you're not a woman, are you? You're a man. And it was almost like the character told me that I had it all wrong and I needed to get it straight. So. One
of our previous interviewees said quiet time is important. You know, we live in an age of television and computers, and I'm thinking that quiet time is the beginning of inspiration.
Well, it is. I always get up very early because my husband and my dog are still asleep. But still, just any little snatch of, if I just write paragraphs, it'll get me started to sit down and continue.
Your books are about southeastern North Carolina.
They are.
Right? Tell us more about that.
I love the area. I think it's beautiful. It's nurtured me. I was born in southeastern North Carolina, even though we lived in Tennessee for 25 years. We're back here. And the history we're so
Absolutely.
rich in history. And
yeah. You just told me that one of your characters went from a woman to a man, but many of your characters are about women.
They are, although I have strong men in my characters too, in my books also.
Okay.
But there's always usually a woman lead, although there is a short story in this book that won a $500 prize, and the main character is a sea captain.
Wow.
So,
your latest book is Spy of Brunswick Town. Tell us about your book.
Well, this is Mariah Long is my main character, and she was a spy for the Confederacy. It's fiction, but there's a lot of research because I wanted to get the battles and the generals right. And she pretty much realizes it's set in 1864, 1865, that the war's over, but she continues to spy and do what she can to, and not really accept the fact that the war's lost. She thinks she can continue to make an effort, but it goes on till the end of the war.
Now, before we went on the air, you told me that you're a student of the Civil War and have a real interest in Civil War here in Brunswick County.
I do, and the sequel to this book is going to be about Reconstruction, because that was such a hard time for everyone and made such an impact on people's lives.
Okay, let's get down to some details. How does one work with dialogue or dialect?
When I first started my ghost book, there's a lot of dialect in there, and someone really criticized me for doing that because there's some local dialect in it. And then someone else said, no, you do it well. And it dawned on me that by profession I'm a speech therapist, and if I don't know dialect, then so I use dialect. I think it can certainly be overdone, and I think if you don't hear it in your head, then you should not even try to do it. But I use dialect. I use dialogue. I think dialogue carries a story.
What advice would a writer such as yourself have for, well, let's say I'm an aspiring writer. What advice would you have for me?
Just to write. I have a good friend that has no interest in being published, but has written her family story and given it to her children. And but if you're interested in writing, then you should do it. Find a good writers group. My writers group has certainly supported me. And
I want to talk about your group in a minute, but if you don't aspire to be published, writing is therapeutic.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, do tell us about your writers group.
Well, we have maybe about 10 regulars and then 15 sometimes, and we meet every other week at Oldham Beach. We go around and take 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning and tell what we've been doing. I mean, when we meet on the 21st, I'll certainly tell them about this interview.
Good, good.
And then we say, yes, I have something to read, or no, I don't. And you have about 10, 15 minutes to read, and you'll be critiqued. And sometimes, one time, one of the fellows looked at me and said, I have no idea what you just said. So I take what they say seriously and go back and try to immediately make the changes. Or sometimes I don't agree with them. Sometimes I think they're wrong. I've been in several groups, but to me this works the best.
Does the term writer's block ever pop up in your meetings?
Occasionally, but we're so verbose, we just write and talk and what have you.
Yeah. We've already said this, it's a unique combination of being a speech therapist, an educator, and now a writer. Did you teach writing in the public schools?
My first job was at Leland Middle School, and I was the language arts teacher. And then, in addition to working with speech, you also work quite a bit with language. So I did a lot with language. When I was the language arts teacher, I did teach writing, and then would correct what the children did. But as a speech therapist, I guess we more worked on oral language.
What can we do in the public schools to promote writing more than we are already?
Well, we're very hampered, as everyone says, by the testing and the scores. I think the internet and what's available to the internet is just opening so many avenues for writing, and shows the necessity for being able to write and all of the arts, to follow all of the arts. So give opportunities to write.
You mentioned that there's a sequel to this book. Tell us about that very briefly.
Well, Mariah is a teacher, and at the end of the war, President Johnson asked her to open schools. He tells her there are quite a few teachers from the North that want to come down and open schools for the freed slaves. So he puts her in charge of that. But it's going to be about Reconstruction and how hard Reconstruction is on the people, and the desire to work through it and make a life for.
Yeah. Our viewers will want to know more about you and your work. Give us your website.
Well, it's all little letters, edithedwards.com. I have a blog from that and a Facebook page, which is Edith Edwards Author. On the website, I try to post what I'm doing and news about my books. And
Dr. Edith Edwards, thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thanks. My guest is Mary Brown. She's the author of an extraordinary book entitled, "Oh God Help Me, My Grandson Killed My Son." Ms. Brown, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me this morning, Jim.
Tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into your writing experience.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in Princeton, West Virginia. My mother and father, Oliver and Grace Scott. My father was actually a coal miner. I have given birth to 4 children, Grace, Thomas, Philandra, and James.
And you've been here quite some time.
I moved to the Carolinas in 1988 after being in a lot of trouble and doing a lot of things that I should not have done. I was into drugs and strung out on drugs, and I moved in 1988. And it was a blessing in disguise. And when I moved here, I rededicated my heart to the Lord in 1991 after overdosing twice on crack cocaine. And I've been saved, living for the Lord, serving the Lord since 1991.
And our viewers will be interested to know that while you're a writer, you're also a minister.
I am. In 1994, I was licensed to preach the gospel under the covering of Prophet Travis Motley, Ambassador of Christ Bible Temple in Wilmington, North Carolina. I am now currently affiliated with Pastor Tracy Troy, Victory in Jesus Ministries in Whiteville, North Carolina. She is my overseer, the overseer of Voice of Deliverance International Ministries.
Let's talk about your writing. How did you become a writer?
Well, Jim, when I moved here in '88, in 1991, this friend of mine had told me the Lord had spoke to her to tell me about writing a book. And I kind of put it off for a while. I knew that I would be writing one. I just didn't know when.
And somewhere along the way, you had a life's experience that caused you to write the book, which is here with us here today.
I did. In 2011, my oldest son, James, was killed in West Virginia. And it was such a tragedy because it was my grandson that killed my son. And God inspired me to write the book in order to get the message out to other people, to encourage them to be able to make it through similar tragedies and ordeals.
That must be one of life's most difficult moments. How did you actually put this to paper, or how did you actually put it together?
Gosh, Jim, it was difficult. It took much prayer, much fasting, much seeking the Lord because of the magnitude of the accident. This was my son that was killed, and then it was my grandson that killed him. And through many tears and much prayer, I was able to get the book written and published.
All writers write with a purpose. You're writing with an even more compelling purpose in this instance. Tell us about it.
Well, Jim, I want the readers to, when they purchase the book and they read it, I want them to see and kind of understand some of the things that I went through with the death of my son and how difficult it was to get through this ordeal. But because of God's grace and because of His mercy, I was able to endure and I was able to get through this ordeal. And I want the readers to know that no matter what you go through, no matter what the situation is, that you can always depend on God to bring you through it and help you live even after such a tragedy as this.
So there's a great deal to learn for our readers of your book to know that that you've lived through this experience and others can live through very difficult experiences as well.
Yes, I cannot say that it was easy because it was not easy. Many sleepless nights, many tears that I cried
Sure.
and shed it. But again, I have to give God the glory for bringing me through. I know a lot of people that have been maybe through similar experiences have lost their mind, resorted to alcohol or drugs. And if it had not been for God, I don't know. I just don't know what I would have done, Jim.
Well, life does have some big ups and downs, and this was a most difficult one for you. What other advice would you have for those who are either watching us here today or might read your book?
Well, I would encourage them to forgive, first of all.
Good. Very good.
Because once you forgive, it brings about a healing process in your inner man. And once you're able to forgive, then you're able to be able to deal with whatever the situation might be. It doesn't necessarily have to be the murder of one of your loved ones. It could be anything that you are having problem with forgiving. So once you forgive, it releases you to be able to just go on with your life. And again, it's not easy. It's not easy, but we've also got to remember that the Word of God tells us if we don't forgive others, then He will not forgive us.
So forgiving is as much about the person forgiving as the person being forgiven.
Yes, sir,
Forgiven.
it is. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Do you hope to write some more books?
I do. I've got another one in mind, and this one will be, How Can Ministry Come Out of a Mess Like Me?
Oh, come on. Is that the name of it?
That's going to be the name of it.
Say it one more time.
How can ministry come out of a mess like me?
And you're going to provide us with some answers to that question, aren't you?
I am.
Have you begun to put that together?
I have not.
But it's in your mind.
It is. It is. And just a little bit about it. It'll just
Sure.
detail how God raised up a crackhead, an alcoholic, person that just really didn't care about much of nothing, and how He raised me up. And now He's using me for His glory, to preach His gospel. God has allowed me to go outside of the United States. I've been to Jamaica for 9 years preaching the gospel, in the Bahamas and Trinidad and Grenada. And it's a blessing, Jim, that God would take a coal miner's daughter out of the hills of West Virginia and use me for His glory. So I'm excited.
I know that our viewers will want more information about you and your book. Can you provide us with information as to your website and contact information?
Yes, you can contact me. My phone number is 910-297-3067. Email is maryscottbrown54@hotmail.com. Our website is Mary Scott Brown. You can order the book online at Westbow Press, Books A Million, Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, and Lifeway Christian Bible Book.
Well, you are one beautiful lady, and
Thank you.
and your smile tells it all, and we thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest is Marybeth Whalen. Marybeth is a writer whose several works focus here in Brunswick County. Marybeth, we're glad you're here.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Tell us how one becomes a writer. How did you become a writer?
I became a writer. That's the way I came into this world. It's something that I have done since I was old enough to hold a pen or a pencil and write little girl stories and dream up worlds that took me away my imagination.
Okay.
And were inspired by, I was always a big reader. I think that's a huge part of how one becomes a writer is reading. And I was always a big reader.
I'm getting ahead of the story. I know that you have 4 books. You've written
Yes.
one each year for the last several years. Tell us about those books, and I know at least several of them are set here in Brunswick County.
They sure are, yes. My very first novel was The Mailbox, and it's based on the real mailbox that sits on Bird Island at Sunset Beach. And it actually was an idea that kind of occurred to me out of the blue as I had visited the mailbox with my husband, and we were walking home back to our beach house, and I said, you know what would be a great idea is if somebody wrapped a love story around that mailbox as kind of a connection point between two people. And my husband, who had heard 1,000 book ideas in our marriage, stopped it dead in his tracks and looked at me and said, now, if you don't write that one, you're crazy. And I remember thinking, okay, I really might be onto something. And so actually that very summer, I started writing that novel and wrote it pretty quickly, and that became my first novel, and that's The Mailbox. And then the other two that are set in the Sunset Beach area is the guest book, and that was last year's book that came out last summer. And then I have one this summer called The Wishing Tree.
All right. Those of us who live here in Brunswick County are delighted that your books are here, but how did you get interested in Brunswick County?
Well, I'm from Charlotte, and
Okay.
so it's a pretty easy drive down here, about 3.5 hours. I know it well by now. And when I was 15 years old, a good friend invited me to come to the beach with her family, and I spent a week here and just fell in love with the place and made a little resolve in my 15-year-old heart that when I was old enough and had my own family, I would bring them back here, and I have.
You're an adopted Brunswick Countian.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah,
Right.
It's where my heart lives.
Sure.
That's for sure.
I know you have a large family, and I'll ask you a couple of questions. How do you find time to write? And tell us a little bit about your family as well.
Well, I have 6 children. They range in age from 21 down to 8. And so it's a crazy life. It is hard sometimes to find the time. But I think if you're passionate and you're committed, you will find the time, whether it means getting up a little earlier or staying up a little later, or just taking that 15 minutes at your lunch break or when the kids are not doing something and committing, I'm going to make this a priority every day.
Do you keep a laptop or an iPad or something close by?
I do. I keep my laptop open at all times.
Other writers have told me that they actually capture thoughts in the middle of the night or anywhere, and that they try to write it down quickly before it goes away. Is that true for you?
Oh, for sure. I have paper in my purse, my car, in my nightstand drawer, notebooks that I keep constantly with ideas for future books, and that's just something that you do. You have to get it down because you will not remember if you're like me.
Okay. A good writer has a great imagination, right?
True.
How do you develop a character or series of characters? How do you come up with them?
For me, they kind of just show up. And I know that sounds a little hocus pocus.
I can
but
understand that.
They do. They kind of just show up and start talking. And the trick is paying attention and letting them continue to talk and letting them develop and giving them time to develop. That's the one thing I'm learning the most, is that I can't just right out of the gate start writing a character. I've got to give it time and listen to who they are and what they want and really dig deep before I'm ready to
Well, I like
tell
the
the
two
story.
words you just said. You have to pay attention.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell me a little more about that.
Well, it's easy in the rush of life to get distracted and to let the noise of life and the busyness of life ebb away at your attention and your creativity. And so for me, it's learning to capture those thoughts and, as you said, get them down and preserve them and listen to them and make sure that they are important in your life.
Yeah, that's pretty nifty. You mentioned that 3 of your books are set here in Brunswick County,
Yes.
but one is not. Tell us
Right.
a little bit about the setting there.
That one's actually in my hometown in Charlotte. It's much more of a suburban kind of desperate housewives, real housewives of Charlotte, North Carolina kind of story. It's much more peeking in their windows and seeing what's really going on behind those perfect neighborhood facades. And so that's called She Makes It Look Easy. And that was a fun one to do.
How would you, in general terms, how would you describe the fiction that you write? Of what genre or class?
Women's fiction. I think some of my books, especially the first one, The Mailbox, tends to be a little more romantic in tone, but definitely my sweet spot where I like to live is kind of the conflicting emotions of a woman, whether that's as a mom or a wife or a friend or a daughter, a sister, those different relationships that women are living out every day, and just digging into those and seeing what's going on in the minds and hearts of women. So,
Do you begin with the end in mind, or does the novel work its way through sequentially and naturally?
I always have the end in mind.
Okay.
I do. And actually, most of my books I've written, when I've written the first draft and I've written that last line, it has stayed exactly as I wrote it. It never changed through all the edits or anything. The last line's always pretty much been exactly what I said. And it's been funny because when I wrote the last line of my newest, The Wishing Tree, I was not really necessarily intending to end at that scene. And when I wrote that line, I was like, well, that's the end. And that was
Good.
kind of a neat, fun thing to happen. That's never happened before.
Yeah. Once you finish a first draft, do you have others that will read your drafts, or do you work on all of those issues yourself?
Now that I'm under contract and kind of writing on a tight time frame, typically my editor is my reader. So that's kind of how it's worked thus far. So.
Okay, you just mentioned time frame, and
Yeah.
that causes me to ask you another question. Are you bound to a tight time frame? And what is your time frame for
well,
writing
with doing
a book?
a year, it's been kind of a quick pace that I've been producing at since the first book came out. So, I mean, I love it. I don't really know now how to function without a contract and a deadline.
I see.
I do best with that.
You're one of those folks that
Yeah.
work well
Under
with
the
deadlines.
gun. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I understand that. Tell us about your latest book, which is called The Wishing Tree.
Well, it's a story about Ivy Marshall, who is happily living her life in Asheville, North Carolina, when her sister is proposed to on national television on kind of a Good Morning America type show one morning, and she's happy for her sister until she finds out on that same day that her husband is cheating on her, and throws her into a tailspin, as you can imagine. And it starts a series of events that winds her up at sunset, where her sister's wedding is going to be held. Okay. And her mom, who is trying to help, puts her in charge of some jobs to get ready for the wedding. And one of the jobs she's put in charge of is the wishing tree for the wedding, which is actually a custom that is a tree that it's basically branches in a pot, to be honest. Guests can come and hang tags that they've written wishes for the couple. And it usually is at the reception. And she's put in charge of this. And the story is basically about the wishes that we go into marriage with versus the realities that we find when we're there.
And you've saved the ending so that our viewers can get the book, right?
Yeah.
Right?
So, trust me, what I told you is like the first chapter of the
Okay,
book. It's
good.
very quick.
We talked a little bit about this before we went on the air. And that is whether writing is difficult, whether it's challenging, whether you write in small bits or large spurts. How do you write, and how difficult is it?
How do I write? Well, for me, I have learned, I think every writer has to find their sweet spot, and that's different for every single writer I've ever talked to. For me, that's 1,000 words a day. That's not too hard. It's not too easy. It's just enough. And at 1,000 words a day, if your average novel is about anywhere from 80 to 90,000 words, typically, that's typical. Mm-hmm. You can write a first draft at that rate in about 3 months. And so I've kind of learned how I can do that and pace myself, and I'm very, very disciplined about meeting that word count every day, especially, obviously, when I'm under a deadline.
I bet you are.
Yeah. So I've learned how to make it work.
Do you have plans to do a book a year for years
I
to
hope
come?
so. I would love to. I would love
Okay.
to. I have several more Sunset Beach, kind of love story, women's fiction ideas that I'd still love to do.
Do you hear from some of your readers?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Some of the most fun has been the mailbox, the original one, is people that have actually read the book, come here and made the trek out.
I see.
Girlfriends doing, girlfriend weekends, and
Sure.
they all read the book and then they come. And that's always so rewarding to think that, people discovered this treasure because they found the book. And that's always so fun to read,
Right.
get those emails.
Marybeth Whalen, you've had a great deal of success already. We wish you even more success in the future. And
Thank you.
Thank you for being
Great.
with us.
Thanks for
Been
having me.
fun. Thanks. Thank you for joining us this month on Our Hometown. It's our hope that you've enjoyed hearing the stories of a few of our local authors. If you have a story that you'd like to share on a future show, visit us at atmctv.com to tell us about it. Thanks again for joining us, and tune in again next month as we explore more of Our Hometown.